Hello, my name is Frank Schaeffer. I am part of Vote Common Good. And there's a lot of places I go that I don't actually know the candidate personally, but I happen to know Kara. I happen to be a fan of Kara. I happen to retweet her every thought. And I'm someplace that I'm very pleased to be because of that. A couple of months ago, I forget what, long before the primaries, I had a personal burden at my own expense to share some of my platform online with folks. I've got about, I guess, 90,000 followers on Facebook and Twitter and this kind of thing. And I've been making little video commentaries about the person that we have in the White House who has shamed our country. But I thought, okay, instead of just bitching about all this, get out and use this platform to talk about Kara and to talk about other candidates. So I did a dozen or so interviews. I would fly somewhere. I would meet with Kara and people who were running. And it's a thrill that one of the people that I like best personally and hit it off with, whose husband, by the way, is not only a professor, but also a punk rock star, which I think is very cool. And so we got a rock and roll family of people who also are in public policy and taking care of children and families. And the beautiful thing about Kara to me was here's someone who hadn't run for this kind of office before and who had stepped up because she felt she needed to do something, not to fulfill a lifelong political ambition, but the same way that we step up and try to, say, pull a child from a burning car. The same way that ordinary people, decent human beings, address an emergency. So let me tell you just a little bit about myself and give perspective on this talk here, and then wrap things up for this afternoon with another piece of music, and we'll be done in a couple of minutes. I grew up, as the New York Times called me in a profile they did a little while ago from a project I wrote called Crazy for God, which was a memoir. I'm an author by trade. And they said that Frank Schaeffer, evangelical royalty, regarded us as a traitorous prince, regarded that way by evangelical white right-wing voters who have put Trump in power. Because I left that movement. I became progressive in my thinking. I became an activist that does crazy things like jumping on an airplane to interview Kara to do my bit that I could bring to the table to flip Congress and to put some sort of hedge around this berserk fool that we have as the leader of our country right now. And because of my background in the evangelical community and the fact that last time, for instance, I did this kind of national tour, I happened to be flying around, this is a good 30 years ago, in Jerry Falwell's private jet, who founded the Moral Majority. Meanwhile, my mom and dad were staying at different points in the Ford White House and the Reagan White House, etc. My mother is one of the only people in American history, and I bet this is true, at least in modern American history, who actually went up to the gate of the White House when Ford was president. And by the way, his son and his daughter were living with us at the time in a ministry in Switzerland that my parents had. They were with us for a year, and Mike Ford and Gail used to babysit my daughter Jessica. And my mom went up to the White House gate and actually said to the guard standing there in a glass booth, "Could you just tell Betty I'm in town and I really would like a swim in the pool?" And the guy actually called other security that came running out. But somebody sort of figured maybe instead of just wrestling her to the ground and handcuffing her and dragging her off, they would do something. And 10 minutes later, Betty Ford, the First Lady of the United States, and this is not bullshit, this is a true story, walks out of the White House front door in her bathrobe and slippers and comes down to the gate and says, "Edith, you didn't tell me you were going to be here." And of course, the Secret Service guys are all now wetting themselves because they haven't been very polite with my mother. And it was literally just like two old friends meeting. So that was my background. When you're looking at me, you're not looking at someone talking about the religious right. You're looking at the religious right. Because I was the nepotistic sidekick to my dad. And in evangelical circles, as you know, we function like North Korea. We have nepotistic sidekicks follow. So Franklin Graham is now following in the footsteps of his dad, Billy Graham, although Franklin's not, because he's a homophobic, reactionary, right-wing Republican white supremacist in the name of Jesus, which seems weird to me. But in any case, I went in a very different direction. And so we are here today, and I just want to wrap this up by saying this. When I look at Kara, and I look at what she's doing, Normally, the message to the candidate would be kind of political. I hope we win. Good luck with what you're doing. But I have a different message for Kara and for the candidates who are trying to flip Congress. And it's a much more basic message. It is save us. Because nothing is left that stands between us and Donald Trump except the chance we have to flip Congress. That's it. The federal judiciary has been stacked, and I'm not just talking about the Supreme Court. All the way down the list, more judicial appointments vetted by right-wing extremists, people in both the religious right and also like the Federalist Society and so forth that have given him a list. He knows nothing about these people, but people like Ralph Reed in the evangelical right have told him, you tick this list and we'll still be in your corner. And so we don't even have a federal judiciary, let alone a Supreme Court, that is going to stand as a bulwark and a check and a balance. We have one last shot, and this is not hyperbole, and it happens on November 6th. If this doesn't happen, everything that you have seen that horrified you about the first 2 years will turn into 6 years with a difference. There won't even be a hope of reining him in. And once this maniac, this egotistical person, this evil man, and I would not say that about most politicians I disagree with, but this evil man is given carte blanche with not even a perspective on the horizon of anybody curbing his wild, impulsive instincts, you ain't seen nothing yet. If you think these first 2 years have been erratic and crazy, then don't volunteer to work for Kara Eastman and go door to door with her. Don't take one of the lawn signs and put them on your lawn. Don't make a donation to her bucket. Don't fight to stay awake at night making calls for her. Just sit back and wait, because it's coming. And I'll tell you what, it is apocalyptic, and I don't mean that in a biblical sense, because this man let loose, having been given a stamp of approval, which the country will have given him, saying, we like you so much, Donald, we're not only keeping you in office in 2020, we're going to give you a Congress that won't stop you, is basically a suicide note written collectively by religious, deluded, white evangelical Christians who have moved so far from where they were when I was in the big God business that we would not recognize ourselves if we fast forwarded. If you had told my dad as we were out on the hustings trying to create the anti-abortion movement out of thin air, because by the way, footnote for you guys, do you know that back in the day who we had to talk into joining the anti-abortion movement? Billy Graham, the editors of Christianity Today magazine, Dr. Criswell, who was the leader of the Southern Baptist Convention. Why? Because most evangelical leadership in that day, much of it was pro-choice. Do you understand that? Do you think this has always been a litmus test issue, somehow like the Roman Catholic Church had these things about contraception as doctrine? No. It was a politicized issue put there on purpose by two kinds of leadership. One, evangelical leaders that I knew personally, and yes, they're as bad as you think they are. And they saw a fundraising opportunity to keep people permanently enraged so that they could tap into this again and again and again. And then a Republican leadership like Jack Kemp, whose home I was staying in Washington, D.C. while we were there. We knew him personally and very well, all the way up through his Bob Dole campaign and so forth, who sat down and said, this is a gift, because now we can get these evangelicals who don't vote because they don't care about politics out of the pews with this issue. Thank you. It was a tactic, and it's a tactic to today. It's the kind of lies they're going to tell about Kara, that she's pro-abortion, pro-this, pro-that. It's easy. It's a cheap shot. It's easy. It's just like them, you know, in the old days referring to someone as saying, well, I think he's a little soft around the edges. Maybe he's gay. A way to write people off. It's this continued moralistic drip, drip, drip of nonsense. And so today we have an opportunity. So I just want to conclude by saying this. Kara, you're standing back there. Thank you for sticking around. I'm flattered. You're busy. But seriously, save us. Save us. Thank you, Kara.